Are you in the middle of a difficult season? Then this episode is for you. Aren and Trina Bahoudourian are on the podcast to discuss their journey of drawing close to God in the midst of suffering. They share their story of dealing with chronic illness and losing their child, and how in the midst of all of this, God called them to create a ministry called Remain. Remain is a gospel-centered ministry to encourage those in hard seasons to remain faithful to God with resilience. For more information, you can visit their website, remainwithus.org. With that said, please grab a cup of coffee and enjoy this Christ-centered conversation. Hey guys, welcome. So good to meet you guys. I met you before Auden, but first time I'm meeting you, Trina.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. It's just good to meet people in ministry. And, I'm kind of a newcomer to the West Coast, but you've been here for a while. So the most, difficult question I have to ask, how do you drink your coffee?
Should I start or do you?
Go for it.
I'm okay either way. Like I'll do church coffee in a styrofoam cup or instant, but I'm totally fine having a good latte as well. Like I can.
You're not picky.
I'm not.
That's the problem, though.
That's a problem.
So I'm assuming you have.
You'd be totally fine.
I'm sorry.
Like if I drink a bad cup of coffee, I will have the opposite effect of being caffeinated. I would be like
it wouldn't,
more tired.
Yeah,
somehow.
It wouldn't count. Like styrofoam coffee doesn't count. It's just let me have a cup of coffee at church to talk to someone. But then you drink good coffee. So I need good coffee sometimes.
Okay. You seem to have a strong reaction towards that comment. What's your favorite type of coffee?
A little bit. At the moment, I would just say I just drink a oat milk latte. That's my drink right now. But
iced, hot, or
hot, definitely hot. I do like iced, but if I make it by myself on my machine at home, then it's fine. I'm just a self-professed coffee snob.
Okay,
so.
You're on the right podcast.
It's okay.
Were you always
We accept you?
Were you always a coffee snob, or did you just grow into it? Or
I worked as a barista for 8 years in Sydney.
Okay,
I'm from Sydney, and I had the most picky barista in the world train me.
That's a good thing, though.
He was insane. Like we would literally he was competing to win the National Barista Championship in Australia.
Okay. Did he do it?
He came third,
Yeah.
which is amazing. Yeah. But so he was training me and this other guy. And I mean, I had been trained. I thought I knew what I was doing. And he was like, forget everything you know. And so he made us every coffee we would make, he would take it, he would hold it. Like all espresso, like lattes, cappuccinos, flat whites.
Throw it away.
He would take it. He would look at it. He would sniff. He wouldn't even drink it. He would sniff it, and then he'd be like, "Dump this out."
Wow. How many cups of coffee did you destroy in the training
so
process?
So much money we would throw out, and sometimes I wouldn't want to throw it out, so I'd literally stand there and drink
it,
shot after shot of like
6, 7 a day.
That's amazing.
And was way too caffeinated every day at work. But hey, so.
Part of the perks of working there, right? Or you have to pay for it. No. Okay, that's good.
Well, it was a waste. He was going to make me throw it away. So that was fun. But so I think that made me a coffee snob. Like it's all his fault.
But you feel like it's a good thing, or you're grateful for because I feel like a pivot is happening culturally where Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks is no longer cutting it for most people. And gradually, collectively, we're all getting more snobby.
Yes, we are getting more snobby. It's taken a while. So Sydney is definitely a lot more of a stronger European type coffee culture.
Okay.
And,
did you know the history of why that's the case? Why Sydney's coffee is good?
I think just a lot of the influence in Sydney is a lot more like European. Like there's a strong Italian influence in like coffee shops and I think like Australians love this thing of like really just striving to be really good at something just because it's fun, just because they enjoy it. Yeah. And it's created a very like exciting and competitive barista environment there.
Yeah, they're competing for the country's top competition.
I mean, baristas make amazing money in Sydney. So if they make amazing money, like they are expected to, every cup they put out is like a standard. Like people are lining up for that. So
that's great.
So yeah.
So what are your thoughts on LA coffee culture? Because I'm coming from New York City here. I have some opinions of my own.
Like if we're out of town, she'll Yelp. And if it doesn't have like 1,000 reviews, like she won't want to try it out.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
But there's a few places
Yeah.
in the area that we'd really like.
We've found some good areas.
So they exist. Like I feel like
You got to find them.
you have to look for them though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they won't go out of business if they're bad necessarily because it's so geographically spread out. Versus like an urban city, like that's more a traditional city where it's concentrated space of every corner there's a coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's survival of the fittest. So if you don't have good coffee, you will go under. So Sydney seems to be more cutthroat, but the competition leads to better quality where your barista boss is throwing coffee left and right just to make sure the standard is up there.
So LA, I think the funniest, like the hottest thing for me was like after moving here, how everyone was so happy with like Starbucks or like, but that's changing. I mean, that was 15 years ago when I moved here, 16 years almost. And now it's like people actually want good coffee. And so it's definitely been a changing dynamic.
Yeah.
I still think that my mom, so every time my mom's the biggest coffee snub.
Okay, so it's not just your boss here. Okay.
So then every time she comes out here, she's like,
What is this?
what is this? Like every day, I'm like, Mom, this is a great coffee shop. Like I love the coffee here. And she's like, at the end of her last trip, she's like, I figured it out. I'm like, what is it? She's like, it's the water. The water here is disgusting. I'm like, she's like, you can't have good coffee with bad water.
It's true. It's true. You got to filter your water at home. That was the key for me to unlocking some decent coffee at home is the filtered water. Yeah.
It's just funny. So yeah.
And the right beans. The beans matter. And and the rest is just, acquired skill and machinery. Mm-hmm. So you're from California originally? Mm-hmm. You're born here?
Yeah.
Born and raised?
Yep.
You're from Sydney.
Yeah.
So how did you two meet? Like
the condensed version is that she was visiting cousins in the summer of 2005, close to us, and we met at a church function, and we just started talking. And then she was around a couple of months, but I was too kind of shy to approach her.
Remember that?
And no, I think it was just shy.
Yes.
And the last night she said, I'm leaving. And I said, wait, like, can I have lunch with you? So her last day, we had an amazing lunch and we exchanged emails and we started writing just long emails. It was our friendship grew from letter writing, and then we started talking on the phone. And then a year and a half later, I flew out with my siblings. So yeah, our second date was 18 months into the relationship.
19 months, yeah.
the friend foundation. But you liked her from the moment you saw her.
I did like her.
Did you like him the moment, or you're like, this is just a nice guy?
No, so like the first moment I saw him, there was something there and I was like, what? Like it was very weird. And then the first date we had, I was like, for some reason, beyond myself, convinced I was going to marry him.
Okay, that's cool.
So that made us survive.
Love that story.
That made us survive the long distance. Because I'm like, if that hadn't happened, there's no.
Yeah. What's the hour difference? It's pretty substantial, right?
When the time changes, it's either 17 hours or sometimes it's 15 hours.
It's like the worst difference.
It's really bad.
Yeah.
No, I would, in seminary, I would get on the phone at 10 p.m., talk till 1, and she, just came from
So
work.
you were in seminary while you had that first encounter?
Yeah.
So you knew what you were getting into with ministry right away? Or
And it was what I was never going to get into.
Why is that?
I had a list of my nevers and marrying.
I don't think any pastor wife looks forward to being a pastor's wife.
Right?
Like, I don't think... And if they are, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah, it was on my, I'm never marrying an Armenian, never marrying a pastor. And I forget, I was never moving to America. And it's like a 3 for 3. So
There you go.
But after that trip of like 12 days, I knew.
Okay, you knew.
I told, my father-in-law that this is my intention. So when she came that summer, 2 years after our first date, I proposed.
Okay.
And then we got married a year later. So 3 years out of 36 months, we were away from each other, maybe 32 months.
yeah.
Wow.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Amazing. And then you guys were in ministry. You served the church. And then you currently serve a church in Orange County, but also you have this ministry called Remain.
Yeah.
Well, can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, we've had some connections with OC Church, ACFOC. I've done guest teaching, preaching for many years. So I think after COVID, we just started connecting there a little bit more. But in the spring of 2020, as I was finishing like a year-long kind of small group to help us figure out how God has shaped us. What is our calling? What are we here for? And one of the questions that came up was, what do you want to do for the kingdom? Or maybe how do you want to be dangerous for the kingdom of God in a sense? And I just wrote the word remain. And the way I share this with the group was I wanted to remain, to endure, to be faithful. And I want to encourage people to remain in hardship. And I left that idea. I was like, oh, that was great. Until about 5 months later, Trina said, she had an aha moment and said, what if we start a ministry and we do this? So that led to another year of conversation, and we looked at different possibilities, different ways to do this, different organizations to work under.
But in the midst of that, we started recording a podcast. So we started a podcast in the middle of the pandemic called Remain, and it was literally just 30 episodes. It took that long of us like kind of telling our story of why we were doing this and just what we had walked through. So it was like looking back on at that point. Yeah. At that point, then, like 9 years of our story.
That's like issues of faith, issues of like marriage, issues of ministry in light of what we've been through. Not thinking anyone would listen, but we felt like we needed to tell a story.
Yeah, it's amazing when people just get honest with their journey, how powerful it is, and just having real conversations versus these packaged conversations that just it resonates because it's true. Yeah. It's your story, and no one can argue a story. So just to unpack these 30 episodes in a synopsis, what happened? Like what are you talking about exactly?
I don't
know. Where to begin?
Well, kind of where did it?
So you get married?
Yes, we got married. Fast forward a little bit. I was pregnant with our first son, who is now just turned 12. And I began having weird symptoms during my pregnancy. Never been pregnant before, so we were like, don't know what's going on. After he was born, it didn't get any better. It actually slowly got worse. Didn't know what was going on. When he was a year and a half, my health like completely overnight crashed. Like it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me.
And that happened at a women's retreat, and the theme was suffering and the sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
Is it an Armenian conference on top of it?
Yes, it was.
Of course. Okay.
And I was meant to be leading worship. I was so sick. I was lying on the back of the pews, like half passed out, almost like through every session.
That's when her system just broke.
And so, but that I was like, I'm going to recover. I never actually, to this day, I haven't fully recovered from that.
So what is it?
So it took 2 years to figure out. We were at the ER 1,000 times and
we did every test.
Multiple specialists, multiple doctors. So 2 years of like undiagnosed. And I lost 45 pounds in like 2 months. Like it was just bizarre. At the end, they figured out I had chronic late stage Lyme disease. Wow. And by that point, it was not...
With several co-infections too.
Yes. And at that point, it was not really treatable. It was going to be a very long journey to like gain back function.
So what does that mean? Were you bit by a tick or something like that?
Yeah.
Like a while ago or recently?
Yes.
Like
so we've
probably in Australia?
We've pieced together this story. No, we believe I was bit by a tick in Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
I lived in Switzerland for 4 months when I was 20. And I was hiking in the woods every day. I lived like halfway up a mountain.
Yeah. She went for children's ministry training.
It was in this old monastery.
Yeah. She got very, very sick.
I got super sick in Switzerland, like very sick. It was middle of summer. I had paralysis in my legs. So all of those go with like classic tick bite. We didn't know. No one told me. They took me to a village doctor. I'm like, it's actually, considered epidemic in Switzerland. So the fact that no one checked me for it is just bizarre. But I never saw a tick bite. Like I probably had it like on the back of my head or something. Like I wasn't going to see it.
Usually a ring, right? That's the indicator.
Yeah, which
and
she doesn't.
They say a lot of like I think it's about 70% of Lyme patients never remember having a bullseye rash. Like so it's something that can easily be missed. Anyway. So finally got diagnosed, and then we were like, oh, yay. Okay, God, we've been praying so long. We finally know what it is. Now we're going to get better. And that's not how this
That launched us into 7 to 8 different types of treatments. Local, we flew out to a few different states. We even did an international trip as a medical treatment.
So what are some symptoms of Lyme disease, or what makes this different? I'm pretty ignorant about it.
Okay, Lyme disease has like over 400 symptoms, but and a lot of patients have different types of struggles. So there's more neurological Lyme, which affects the brain.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people have a more like digestive related Lyme that begins with the digestive system and then kind of spreads. So that's how mine started. That's probably why I lost all that weight at the beginning and we didn't know why. Just literally my digestion shut down overnight.
We're like doctors saying it's stress for
No,
the 2 years,
doctors-
or they're just like, we don't know.
Like one doctor said, we don't know what it is. Go home. If you're unwell, come back. It looked like chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yes, I was extremely fatigued,
She
extremely
would spend
weak.
half the day in bed.
Wow.
And at her worst, if she got up and we went on a walk, she would walk half a block and then go home to rest a few hours.
Got it.
Yeah. So the fatigue was unreal. I had a lot of like heart-related symptoms, like severe episodes of tachycardia that would just go on for hours. So I felt like I was like coming out of my body.
Mental
It was-
fogginess.
Yeah, brain
a lot of
fog.
pain.
I would have neuropathy in my arms and my legs. So like it would just start tingling and I couldn't feel my arms and legs.
So was this triggered after you gave birth or during your pregnancy?
So the tachycardia was the first symptom. It started during pregnancy. We thought it was just the stress of pregnancy on my body, but it was not normal. They couldn't figure out why it was so bad. And then it kind of then became, like they were just so confused. It then became digestive issues for like a year. It was mostly all digestive to the point I could eat 5 foods without being sick. Like it was just didn't make sense. Yeah. And then after that year, I started having more like the neuropathy and the stuff that I was like, oh, this is not a GI issue. This is something else. But it just took so long. And then like Aren was saying, we went down basically rabbit holes that we believe that God led us down because we was so overwhelmed.
We took each route with a lot of care, a lot of prayer, and we really sensed God's leading with each type of treatment. And in the end, our conclusion was that God, for reasons beyond us, led us to detours and dead ends. I remember speaking with one pastor, an elderly pastor, who said, do the doctors know what is wrong with you? And when we said no initially, he said, good, because if they told you what's wrong, you would trust them. Now, all you can do is trust God. So in the midst of all this, we were extremely kind of desperate and dependent on the Lord.
Yeah.
So the current state of thing is this is something you have to accept. It's not something that's been cured.
It's not, so Lyme disease doesn't have a cure when it's chronic, but there is remission. Like there's a possibility of going into like complete remission or like, so I believe like I am like in a partial remission. I've never been symptom free since 2011. Okay. But I would like, compared to how I was at my worst, which was horrific, I would say I'm like 75% better than that, which is like amazing considering how bad things were.
But you definitely had to process like it could be this 100% pain for the rest of my life too. Did you get to the point of accepting that?
I think the hard thing of it is, so like there's the 75% is like my baseline. There's days where like I get a flare up or like a season where I'll get a flare up for like a few weeks or a couple of months. And that is when it's like, it's a mental game.
Scary.
It's scary. And it's like a thing, okay, like, is God big enough if this does happen again? And if I get launched into this unknown of like, and can I have a flare up and not go down that road that this is going to be forever? But it's a hard thing I've had to accept from a young age. And I was like an extremely, like growing up, it was always like, my friends would be like, oh my gosh, you're the type of person who fits like 28 hours into a 24-hour day. You're like busy, active, like always doing stuff, like never stopping. And it halted my life to the ground. Like I couldn't take care of, like I was at home, Aren was working as a full-time pastor. I couldn't take care of our son. So he had to start preschool at the age of like 2. And I would drive him to the preschool, barely be able to walk him into class, get back into my car, crawl into my bed at home. I would be in bed for the entire time he was at preschool, get out of the bed, drive to pick him up, get home, lie next to him and like read him a book on the ground because it was just like, so, and somehow God got us through that. Not that it was easy.
Just a quick question for you, because I feel like one of the most painful things is when someone you love is going through it, you feel so helpless. So how did you, I mean, I'm sure there's many people listening, someone they love dearly is going through something they can't help.
Yeah.
Any advice for that?
Yeah, it was very hard because I want to be the hero.
Right.
I want to save. I want to be the fix-it guy, and I couldn't. It was a very humbling and crumbling season for me, and I would just serve her as much as I can and just pray over her. And I would go to, as much as I can, I would go to all the doctor appointments and then all the treatments, which would be full day events, just to kind of walk alongside. And I think I realized years later that there's that switch that happened. Rather than trying to fix, to just come alongside. And I think just offering my presence, just being there with her, was a significant help for her. But I would have to then rely on other people, whether it be my pastor or my close friends, to like, unload upon them.
Right.
But we were quite kind of honest during that time. It was the entire time that I was a college pastor. From that first day, she was sick. So we did college ministry from a place of weakness. We were very honest with our students. We counseled, and I taught, from a very different place because of what we were going through.
Yeah.
But looking back, it was only God's grace
Absolutely.
sustaining us.
Dealing with this chronic Lyme disease, what other big griefs have you gone through?
Sure. So 3 boys. Our oldest, when he was 3, he had a near-death accident, and he fell out the second floor window onto cement sidewalk.
Wow.
I'm saying that very quickly without getting kind of shaken, but over the years when I've talked about his story, I get very overwhelmed. God saved him. And miraculously,
The doctors were like, this was a miracle that he...
They said he will have brain damage and internal bleeding. Be ready for that.
Yeah.
And in the end,
for the worst. Okay.
in the end, they gave him a children's Advil during his day and a half. And the paramedic said, we can't find any cut, bruise, bleeding, or bump. Like,
And
we
no
don't
one
know.
could believe it. It
No
was
indication he fell out the second floor window.
Wow.
So that he was fine. I launched into a good 6 months of severe kind of PTSD as a father.
Right. The number one thing is protector. I hear you.
And then our second, Kai, was born with some health issues, not severe or life-threatening, but enough to really kind of provoke anxiety and just, a lot of appointments and just working through a lot, those first few years. And then
he had a respiratory issue. So like during COVID, our second-born son was on oxygen at night. And so I was like, when COVID started, was like, if he gets this, I don't know what's going to happen to this kid.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot. And I think with all the medical trauma we already had from walking through undiagnosed chronic illness and chronic illness that was not getting better no matter what we did, it just added kind of layers to that.
Wow.
And then she got pregnant again.
This is your third son?
For a third, 2022. But in the spring, we got a diagnosis that turned everything upside down.
Yeah. Probably we thought when I went through Lyme and everything, we thought that we've done it. We've done the gamut on suffering.
Starting a ministry on suffering, we have all the material.
So Remain Ministry starts a couple years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, Remain Ministry started officially in 2021.
And just to summarize the mission statement of Remain, what is it?
So we felt compelled to be a good steward of our suffering. And the idea is to come alongside people in suffering, to encourage them to remain in Christ, to remain in Christ with resilience. We want to come alongside and help people prepare for hard days, but also to help people persevere and process hard days. And we realize that none of this is simple and quick.
Right.
And so our intent is to, over time, come alongside individuals or families, or also come alongside the local church to provide this kind of care that people need.
So how to actually endure through hardship.
Yeah.
Because I find that when people experience extreme suffering, they either go closer to God or run away from God. There tends to be rarely a middle ground there.
Yeah.
So you're there to walk side by side with people. And what you're doing is actually being a true pastor.
Yeah.
You're really helping people endure the suffering, embracing the cross to get to the resurrection.
Yeah.
Not jumping to the resurrection right away, as a lot of theologies do. So it's a great ministry, Remain Ministry.
Yeah.
And then as you're starting this, then another thing happens.
Yeah. So like, I mean, this whole thing of like being able to come alongside people of like how to live in the tension in a sense, like how to live holding on to both things, that God is really good and yet there is real brokenness in the world. And how do we navigate that?
Yeah.
And so I remember when we were launching this, I said to Aren, like, we've been through like so many like griefs in a sense, like there's been so many different losses along the way. And I was like, but I think an area that we just don't really have like personal experience is like the death of someone really close to us. I remember even saying this to him right before we launched the ministry. And we launched the ministry in 2021. Remain was officially launched under our church at that, like we launched it under our church in Orange County. And it was, I fell pregnant.
Just like 6 months later.
I fell pregnant soon after that. And in May, so we launched in September. In May, at 12 weeks along in my pregnancy with our third son, we basically got told that our son would not live. If he made it to birth, he would not live. And so I don't even know, we were launched into the darkest and most difficult season that we've ever had to walk through. The anticipatory grief that we walk through of like this constant thing of like, he's going to die. Is he going to die right now? Is he going to die tomorrow? Was just unbearable.
So let me just understand. So you got pregnant right after you started this ministry and you're given diagnosis that he has some sort of condition.
So we were told, yes, he had it was a genetic, basically it's called trisomy 13. Trisomy 13 is it's an extra copy of the 13th chromosome. And so Down syndrome is trisomy 21. So it's an extra copy of the 21st chromosome. So in severity, it's like there's trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome. Then there's trisomy 18 and 13. That are the other two most common genetic issues like this. But babies with trisomy 18 and 13 have a lot more complexities and kind of things that are going on with their bodies than a trisomy 21 baby does. So it's more severe than Down syndrome. Contrary to what's out there, babies with trisomy 18 and 13 can survive. Like I'm on a lot of these groups because I started following them when I was pregnant. I found like a 38-year-old man on there with trisomy 13, which is what our baby had. But just like Down syndrome is a spectrum.
Yeah.
What our son, his name is Ori, what Isaiah had was one of the worst, most severe forms of trisomy 13. So basically from the very beginning, at the 12-week ultrasound, they were like, yeah, with whatever he has going on, especially with his heart and his brain, like he's not going to make it to term. His heart won't sustain making it to term. If it does, his brain won't sustain any like ability to function once he's actually born. And it was nothing like, because sometimes you have a choice, like, how much are you going to intervene to save your baby? And it's like, if there was anything that we could have done to save him, we would have done that, like 100%.
We had a few long meetings with the doctors and staff as to like, what about in this situation? What about that? What do we do? How much do we intervene? Mm-hmm. So we went through all of that very, very carefully. And our head doctor said in the history of the hospital that he's aware of, they haven't seen a case this severe. But he made it. I mean, towards the end, I feel him kicking, but just the idea that he's here, he's an inch away, and yet he's going to die. And there's nothing I can do.
So once he gets out of the womb...
Well, they told us he was not going to make it to term in the womb. He did. Miraculously, he made it. But when I got to 32 weeks, I started having some complications because he was not able to swallow. So I had polyhydramnios that was getting extremely severe, like excess amniotic fluid. It was getting more and more severe. And I was fighting to keep carrying him because I was like...
Yeah.
And at some point they said your life is going to be at risk.
After this point. Like if you keep going and you're not okay with us, because I needed to have a C-section anyway with everything that was going on. And they said, if you're not okay to have that now, this is it's going to become very risky at this point. And up until then, I was not at risk, like at all, carrying him, but the complications kind of started then. So he was born just shy of 34 weeks via C-section. And we had an incredible, God just had his hand on the entire hospital experience after going through like
The
really,
doctors, the nurses, they were
phenomenal.
incredible.
It was like not something that should have happened.
Right.
And
A few of them came to the celebration of life service later, but he was born and his heart rate started at like 50.
40 when they got
And
him
then
out.
40 and then 10 the last hour. So almost like the doctor didn't even know if he was alive. He was limp the whole time. We just held him and hugged and wept and kissed him until just over 3 hours the doctor said, I'm kind of, I'm calling it like he's passed away.
Wow. I can't imagine. This is relatively fresh still. It's been, what, a year and a half now?
Yeah.
Not even a year and a half since he passed. Yeah.
And how has preparing for such a grief, because it's like one thing when you're blindsided by grief, but this is an anticipated grief.
Mm-hmm.
And it's again, helplessness, out of control. We're going to do what we can. What prepared you to get to this point of like giving birth, then letting go so quickly? Were you, what tools were helpful for you during this kind of?
Yeah.
It was also hard because our boys were losing their brother.
They were aware.
Processing this with them was hard.
Wow.
Where's God? Why isn't God answering our prayers? So there was a lot of wrestling they were doing. And I would, tell them, just, tell me, talk to me. Let's wrestle through this together. Let's cry together. Don't, pull away from me. Part of it is that we tried to make the most of it. We went to the beach. We drove up the coast. He was with us. We had all these family outings.
We made memories with him.
I think a few things that prepared me. I can think of maybe three, maybe there's more, but three truths from Scripture that kept me from unraveling. Number one, Jesus wept. And as I've studied the passage from John 11, when it says that, right before when it says in verse 35 that Jesus wept, it says his spirit was deeply moved. He was deeply moved in spirit.
Yeah.
This is not an emotional Hallmark movie scene. The Greek word actually means he was enraged. He was fuming. He was angry at death. And that anger led him to tears. Every time that word is used, it has to do with like anger. The idea that Jesus is angry at death comforted me because I'm not the only one angry.
That's really good, because I feel like we tend to view emotions as like negative emotions as things that we need to suppress.
Yeah.
And it bottles up, and it's like a beach ball. It'll pop up somewhere else. But that's really good exegesis of that text, because he's literally angry. Because I get that all the time. It's like, Jesus was angry when he flipped the money changers. So Jesus is angry here. He's okay to be angry, but in his anger, he did not sin.
Yes.
In his anger, in this case, he wept.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good.
Number two, Jesus is my high priest. So as a high priest, he not only accomplished atonement, right? He got the job done on the cross, but now as a high priest, he intercedes for us. So it's almost like, when God created all things, it was just a one-time thing. But now with providence, he's upholding, he's sustaining, he's working. Jesus dying on the cross, atonement, it was done. He got the job done on the cross, but now he's still working that out. He's still applying, in the sense that he's bringing our needs to the Father. So those days and weeks that I just couldn't pray, I didn't know what to say, knowing that in a sense, Jesus is saying, I'm praying for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Third would be the resurrection. The resurrection of Jesus, and in light of that, the hope of our resurrection, the deepest core assurance I have that Ori is going to rise again one day, new, that has kept me from unraveling. So when it comes to what are truths, not that I've holding on to, but that have held me in a sense, I would turn to some of those.
Trina, anything for you?
I think I really, really wrestled with why would God kind of
Of course.
allow this? Like, why would God plan for this? Like, why would this be why would he create his life to not give it to him outside the womb? And pretty early on after we got the diagnosis, I remember very vividly a night that I couldn't sleep, and I kept saying to God, like, this is not the story. Like, those exact words, like, this is not the story that I wanted for our family or for my baby. Like, this is not the story I wanted for my son. And I was so, like, just in agony of soul. And I 100% know that God said this to me. And I know people say, oh, God spoke to me. But he really, at that moment, there's been a few moments in my life where God has spoken something to me. And
like a whisper or a spieling?
Almost like a voice that I can hear inside. I don't know, in the darkness at 3 a.m. And it was just these words of, do you trust me to write him a different story? Like, can you trust me to, I know this is not what you want. And it was just this other, kind of what went with that was, he's not less than, Isaiah Orion is not less than, so he gets to die. He's not, it's different. It's not lower. It's not beneath. Because I remember that whole week I'd been driving the boys to and from school. And every time I was driving there and I was seeing all the kids out on the playground before school, it was just daggers in my heart of God, what did he do that? He's never going to get to do that. He's going to miss everything. And it was no, it's different. His story is different. It's not less than that kid's or that kid's. It's different. And I think in different, what God has done in some ways is remind me, because of heaven, which is actually the real thing, and this is just a rehearsal.
Right.
Ori hasn't actually missed out on anything. He's missing a dress rehearsal. And I want him to be here for that because I'm his mom.
Of course.
But he's not missing out. He's already there. He's enjoying God, and he's going to get to enjoy him forever. And we're going to go join him. So I think that's kind of what sustained me. That it doesn't turn out how I want, but that God is at work even in that. He didn't drop the ball, and that's why he's oops, there's a 13th extra chromosome here. It's not what happened. So I think that's kind of what holds me is God is in control. I don't know, but I can move toward and work through the stuff and move toward trusting in his sovereignty, even when I don't get it.
Right.
So I don't need to get it.
Yeah.
Even though I want to.
Yeah. So I find that when we talk about the problem of evil, the fallenness of the world, the theodicies Christians could logically explain, they go, it's Satan's fault or God's providence fault. And, there's a bunch of logical explanations. Well, first of all, thank you for being so bold and courageous for just opening your heart right now. And I'm being moved. I'm trying to hold it together myself. So I just admire your courage and your ministry first and foremost. But it goes along the line here, I just defaulted to just hey, let's logically talk about the problem of evil. Mm-hmm. Where is the point? Is that productive at all, or should when someone is grieving and hurting, what's the best response do you find? Is it just
we have a whole seminar on this?
We prepared a 3-hour seminar called "Help for the Helpers."
Yeah,
to help equip Christians to help people in suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So not to be Job's friends.
Yeah,
basically.
Well, to be Job's friends in the first passage when they're just sitting.
Okay.
But from what we've experienced, and from conversations that have come up over the last 2 years, and from surveying about 25 people who've walked through loss and suffering, there are things that people should say, and there are things that people shouldn't say. There are things that people should be mindful of doing, and there are things that they shouldn't do, or at least
I know it's a 3-hour seminar, but just a couple of common, we want to help people. So
should I give you an example?
Yeah, give an example.
He was saying, is the problem of evil, is it worth talking about these things when someone's hurting? No.
But it's important to have those conversations, but not in the moment.
Yes.
Maybe before, to help prepare. That's why
that's why the ministry
I
exists.
prepared a 31-day podcast devotional on God's providence, teaching through Isaiah 40 to 48, because that's foundational to know where is God that we can turn to in such times.
Okay.
I think when someone is saying, "Where's God?" in that time, it's helpful for us to be as baffled and bewildered as they are.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, okay, let me give you a verse on that. It's important to give a verse, but it's also important to know when and how to present that passage. I think to be as shocked and to share in that emotion that they are having in their time of loss is key. The time will come to give verses, maybe not in the first 5 minutes though.
Yeah, just to be present and just to engage in their emotional
and to allow people, like one of the things we talk about is just to allow people to feel and to cry. Like we live in such a culture where it's like any feelings that are uncomfortable, like did they just go there? Did they just do that? And like we need to, like, here's a tissue, like fix it immediately, kind of. And to be okay with tears. Like God gave us tears. Like
right.
Tears help us heal. Like they help us. And I think I was reading something about this once of like how God can use our tears, like even just the way that he's designed them, it helps us connect with other people. Like it triggers compassion in people. And so like, let people cry with them. Like, that's kind of one of the things we talk about.
There's an order to lament. If we're not careful, someone says, I've been sick for a year, I'm angry at God. I'll say, no, you should trust God. What I'm saying is biblical, but it's not the right order. When we look at the Psalms, for example, a third of them, 50 or so, are Psalms of lament. Trusting God is always at the very end. Every Psalm of lament, except for 2, has a happy ending. And they end with trusting God. They don't start there.
Yeah.
The general pattern is that there is like a cry, there's anger, there's pouring out my soul, there's questions, how long, why, oh God. Then there's a place of like remembering, but I remember you, oh God, like a but God, where the story shifts, and yet I will trust in you.
Yeah.
So I think there is a place to encourage people to trust in the Lord, but it's important to learn from the Psalms, not just a permission to grieve, but also a pattern. And unless we're able to cry out with them, it's difficult for us to quickly give the Band-Aid, of just, trust God in this.
Yeah.
Unless we grieve well, we won't heal well.
So how long does grieving typically last then?
42 months. No.
No.
Go ahead.
I think it depends. I think there are griefs that are deep that we carry our entire lives.
Okay.
I don't think it means you go around crying your entire, that's not what I'm saying. I don't think it means you're like clinically depressed. But what I do think it means is like the grief of losing my son changed me. Like it's a grief that changes you.
Absolutely.
And I feel like till the day I die, I'm going to be a different person because of that. And maybe not all of that is bad. Maybe there's actually like a purpose in that. Maybe like what that grief is doing and accomplishing in my life is something that God can somehow, even how messed up and broken that is, God can use that. God can, because he does that all the time. He takes hold of us in our sin and our weakness, our brokenness, and he still does stuff with us.
Yeah.
Like he's still, so I think there are griefs we can work through and kind of move beyond.
Yeah.
But I think there are some griefs that will stay with us. But I also do think that God is, in that same breath, like he is a God of healing and a God of redemption. Yeah. But this is something like, I'll carry the scar. It won't always bleed. Yeah. But I'll carry the scar. Good. If that.
And if you look to the resurrection, I was one of my Indian friends told me this. He's a theologian. There was an argument of, do we remember this life? And he pretty much took me by the hand and put his finger here. There's a remembrance of the cost and of the resurrection in the afterlife to remind us that there's this suffering, there's this evil, there's this death, but there's a redeemability in Christ. And I've gotten to the point where I don't ask like why this exists, but God, how could you redeem this? Not try to blame God, but God, where are you now in this moment? How can we redeem it? Yeah. And some of the best pastoral advice I got was just show up. Like an experienced pastor, I was young in seminary. I was like, what do I do as a pastor? Just show up. And there's sometimes, you're a pastor, you go to the visitation, you go to the hospital bed, and you're just like, all right, I need to sermonize. And I just shut my mouth, weep as the Spirit weeps, and shut up and show up.
Yeah.
And there's power there. And that's been the simplest advice that's sustained me for my ministry journey. But it's amazing what you guys are doing. Throw like another pastoral cliche, like turning your pain for other people's gain, redeeming the suffering you've gone through to help serve the church. It's very admirable. And I know God is using you guys. So it's amazing that you are so vulnerable to first talk about this, especially we come from the Armenian context where you just bottle your emotions. We survived the genocide, civil war.
We're kind of the opposite of that.
But you're reversing a trend.
Sure. And I tell people when he said, how long, grief is love with nowhere to go.
Yeah.
I don't think I came up with that, but I have an abundance of love for Ori. He's not here. Yeah. So I'm just holding that. So because my love for him will never change, my grieve, in a sense, I will always grieve, but it'll look differently. And I think it's changed me too. Just a week or two ago, I was talking to another pastor friend about just this loss we had in the Armenian Christian community. We lost a pastor. He, died just a couple of weeks ago. And as we were talking about, like, how can we minister to people who are grieving, I said, because of Ori, I think about death and resurrection every day, every single day. Yeah. The way God has worked in our lives, we're doing life and ministry very differently. We know and that's one reason why we want to step forward, to steward well, to be vulnerable, because we know that this is all we have here. And God is able to use this like for an eternal purpose.
Amazing. One final question. If you could say one message to the church in America or Australia or Armenia, what would it be? You could each share. It's one thing. If you were writing a epistle over email, like you guys initially did with your love letters to each other over email, what would the email I'd say to the church?
When it comes to, I can try in one or two sentences. When it comes to suffering, don't be surprised. Be honest with God. Keep your Bible open, and don't pull away from community. We need the community of the church to suffer with. We won't suffer well if our Bibles are closed. We won't handle this well if we close our hearts to God. I think he's inviting us to be honest with him in this. So an open heart, open Bible, and I think, that openness with the church so that we can walk through suffering well.
I was going to say something kind of a little similar, but just this thing of, I wish the church was not so scared and turned off by pain and people who are in pain. Because Jesus himself said, he came for the sick, he came for the weak, he came, and Jesus can do wonderful things among those people. Like, they're the people who need him, who are hurting, who need him. And so often we try to make church into this experience, this positive experience of look at this incredible worship and this wonderful message.
There's no songs of lament during the worship set. Yeah.
And it's how can we create a culture where you truly can come as you are, where you don't have to hide behind this mask of how Armenians, for example, say podcasts or to everything.
Right.
And you can actually say, you know what, I'm not doing well. It's if someone says that to you at church, it's well, why? What's going on? How can I fix you?
Yeah.
And so just if we were slower to fix each other and quicker to just sit with each other in the discomfort, because that's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus enters discomfort and awkward and all those things, and he just stays there with people. And he just loves them through it. So what would it look like if church was like that? I don't know.
It'll look like Jesus' ministry. That's amazing stuff. Where could people find some information about Remain Ministry, some of your resources?
Yeah. So we have a ministry newsletter that we send out every few months if people want to let us know they can contact us, remainwithus@gmail.com. But Remain With Us is also...
So on Instagram, Remain With Us, we're like most active on there. So like sending a message through there or just connecting with us on social media. And then we do different things. So like Aren does like a bunch of men's small groups that he runs for husbands. And I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Yeah. I do small groups for husbands, again, to prepare for and process hard seasons of marriage, starting a new small group for ministry leaders, young ministry leaders, to equip and encourage. We do seminars at church. We'll do individual or kind of couples counseling, but then we provide these resources that we've worked on as well. So there's a few different things that we're doing.
That's great. Thank you so much for opening your hearts to us, your story to us.
Thank you.
And giving hope, the hope there is in the midst of difficult seasons. Thank you for you listeners for tuning to the end of this Christ and Coffee podcast. So grateful that you've tuned in to the end of this program. Please like us, subscribe to us, follow us, share this podcast to someone who might need to hear this story. God bless you. Have a great week and see you next week.